Good afternoon. I'm Dave Giarocco. I'm CEO of Non-Invasics. I've spent my entire career at the intersection between technology and healthcare, first as a graduate student at Johns Hopkins University, then as an engineering leader with a company now known as LivaNova, ultimately moving to commercial leadership roles at both Covidien and Medtronic. While at Covidien, I had the responsibility and pleasure of being part of 3 of the 4 largest patient monitoring acquisitions that have occurred. You'll see that later. But now I'm leading Non-Invasics and our plan to deliver to the market the first non-invasive measure of oxygen in the veins. As a former colleague at Covidien called it, the holy grail of vital signs monitoring. But before we dive into that, let's kind of take a look at our customer and who we serve. So Dr. Scott Smith, he's a critical care physician. He lacks the right data to make real-time treatment decisions. This affects patient lives, outcomes, and the hospital's finances. He's one of 13,000 US physicians that have this problem every day. Information limitation increases uncertainty, risks, and the difficulty in controlling the patient's course of care. He is frustrated by this status quo. What if he could personalize treatment in real time? What if Scott had the ability to detect sooner and safer? What if, for the first time, he had access to point-of-care venous oxygen measurements? And now let's take a look at maybe what he would look at. So sepsis. This is the US facts about sepsis. It is 6% of all hospital admissions are from patients with sepsis. Every year, that's 1.7 million adults presenting into the hospital. It represents 33% of all hospital mortality. So it's not just the 6% of patients that are admitted with sepsis, it's also the patients that develop sepsis while they're in the hospital. When sepsis occurs, the least critical of the versions, it increases cost by 20%, and the average per patient cost is $70,000 per patient. And again, that's not severe sepsis and that's not septic shock. That's the least critical of them, okay? And these facts are after 20 years of concerted effort in US healthcare, driven by the Society of Critical Care Medicine's Surviving Sepsis Guideline campaign, as well as CMS making sepsis care a quality measure where hospitals can get financial penalties. And so why is this the case? Well, we think it's the current approach for monitoring sepsis, and we believe we can improve that status quo. So our product is LiveOx, and it measures oxygen in the veins, as I said earlier. We received FDA Breakthrough Device designation for our technology, and it's a vital signs monitor. And you see on the left, there's the box, the hardware, as we would call it. It's a capital sale. You see coming from that box a black reusable probe that allows the hospitals to take measurements. It connects into a disposable patient interface. It sits right above your sternal notch, just where your clavicles meet, and it actually measures oxygen in the veins. But from a business model, with that approach, we have an annuity, right? We have those patient interface, those sales, and what we have is a razor blade sales model. But let's talk a little bit more. We work through optoacoustics. That's how we measure oxygen in the blood. And I want to take a moment to compare that to what maybe some of you are wearing on your wrists. Pulse oximetry, if you're wearing it on your wrist, or you've been to your doctor's office and they stick a probe on your finger, that is pulse oximetry. It uses light in and light out to measure blood and the capillaries. We're light in and sound out to measure blood or measure oxygen in the blood and the deep vessels of the body. And how we work is we pulse light in and we listen for that sound, and that sound gives us more information than optics alone. This approach has 7 US and 16 worldwide patents, and we have 3 additional patents pending. So our performance equals the invasive gold standard. And let me take a moment when I say invasive gold standard. This is not the parent asking their child late night questions, where have you been? This is actually a catheter being placed, a central line into the body, requires a physician. That catheter is floated or moved towards the heart so that you can sample the blood from that location. Okay? And so now let's talk about sampling. You see on that chart, there are these blue open circles. Well, each one of those represents samples. And so in this study, which is actually a standard study, believe it or not, I'll explain that in a little bit. Each one of those represents a blood draw that a nurse has to take, get it to the lab. That lab has to then do processing on it and send that number back to the doc. You're all healthcare people. How quickly do you think that happens in practice? All right, so that's the invasive gold standard. And you see overlaid on that our black line of our non-invasive continuous measure that can be done at the bedside. Okay? So as I said earlier, this would be called a breathe down study. Believe it or not, it's a standard study to show how oximeters, things that measure oxygen, work. And this is the study that's going to be required for our regulatory clearance. So I just wanted you to park on that. So our technology in that approach, it actually wins awards. In 2023 at the Society for Technology of Anesthesia, we won the best clinical application for those critical care physicians who see such prominence to our technology. As I said earlier, if you had this venous measurement, maybe you would turn and look at sepsis. This is the initial market for LiveVox. And I just want to briefly walk you through this. This is an annual revenue potential for the business. So what I've taken out of this is hardware. Because in commercial execution, hardware is what pays the reps, disposables is what pays the business. And so you can see every year that we have a $1.2 billion opportunity just from this technology. But we don't start there, right? That's where we aspire to get to. So we narrow it down and look at the 193 level 1 trauma hospitals that have more than 50 ICU beds. And that's where we're going to bring our commercial efforts to fore with a selling organization supported by clinical specialists to drive adoption. So vital signs monitoring is a very acquisitive space over the last 14 years. I said earlier that I was part of the three of the four largest acquisitions in the space, and that would be Medtronic's acquisition of Aspect, the acquisition of Somanetics, and the acquisition of Iridian. They should all be somewhere over my left shoulder if I know where I am on stage. But I really want to focus on two of these. Cheetah Medical, 2019, was acquired by Baxter. They're a monitoring company. They informed therapy, like we think we can do at Non-Invasics, and they were taken out at 11x revenue because they had the way to kind of triage and show how therapy is affecting the patient. The other is Kestrel Medical and its acquisition by Zynex, and it's informative because that $31 million acquisition was not only a pre-revenue acquisition, but actually pre-approval. So all they had was technology. So I think it's kind of informative as you think about what are exit opportunities for the business, how that's informed. And then of course the little take-home message on the bottom, the average space is about 6x revenue. But as we think about our multiple exit opportunities and our timing, hey, that says it's possible based on what's happened in the space that we can look at an exit in and around our regulatory clearance, which right now is planned for 1Q26. But then as we grow our revenue, we establish a second potential exit as we start showing that the US sales model has some traction. And then a third potential exit as we continue to scale or inflect that revenue curve and get our OUS clearances. And I really want to be clear, this is just for the LiveVox in measuring central venous. And I want you to remember that as we talk a little bit further. So this is the team. Clearly the team, this is the right team. I just want to highlight one, and no, it's not me. It's Don Pro. He's our MD founder. He's the chief of anesthesiology at the University of Texas Medical Branch. And he actually started developing this technology, not for what we're talking about today, but actually to measure vein in the venous sinus of young children to see what was going on with their brains. Fast forward, this is where we are today. And our board of directors, clearly we have some good super tankers on our board. Our largest shareholders are the Texas Medical Center Venture Fund, as well as Green Park and Golf. But we also have Philips as a board observer. And I do want to take a moment to highlight James Hallowell, who's our independent director. And he's a serial entrepreneur, as well as current CEO of Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals. And then our compelling vision where we take this non-invasive technology and measure oxygen in the veins to do something about sepsis, well, that attracted some pretty big leaders in critical care medicine, but I want to focus on one solely, and that's Dr. Greg Martin. Now, Dr. Greg Martin, he's in pulmonary critical care at Emory, but he's significant because he's one of the lead authors on the Surviving Sepsis Campaign guidelines. So the de facto clinical protocol for what you do about sepsis, Dr. Martin was one of those authors, and he joined not because I knew him from Covidien or Medtronic, he joined because I cold called him. And I talked to him about what we could do in the space, and he joined the team to give us advice to bring this technology to market. So how are we gonna do that? We're raising $6 million to achieve commercial sales in 2026. You can see our key hires as we look to expand our team, and you can see our milestones as we drive from regulatory submission to FDA marketing clearance. So Non-Invasics is an excellent investment opportunity. We're a platform technology addressing clinically relevant problems, starting with the $38 billion problem of sepsis, but then also being able to look at cardiogenic shock and traumatic shock from the same form factor. And no, I didn't put those revenue curves in there. We're an experienced team with over 25 years in patient monitoring alone, and as I said, 3 of the largest acquisitions I was a part of. And we're kicking off a Series raise to get to our marketing clearance and pilot sales. So I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to getting your questions later.